Yeah, it's the Curtis and Chad show.
Welcome to Tanked Down, a show about video games and beer with Curtis and Chad McKinney.
Welcome to Tanked Up, the podcast all about craft beer and video games. I'm your host, Aadil, and this week I'm joined by not one, but two guests. It's Chad and Curtis from BitRock Games. How are you guys doing?
Hello. Doing very well.
Yeah, doing great. Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much for having us. It's good to be back, actually. I really enjoyed our first conversation, and I was sick. This time I feel much better. I'm definitely going to drink this time.
Yeah, I actually had forgotten that you had to take it easy. I mean, both my co-hosts have called in sick, called in. It's sunny out, and the Jubilee is on, and maybe some drinks have been had. But potato. In fact, let's actually go straight to our drinks first, and then we can chat about what BitRot's been up to since we last checked it. Let's start with you, Chad. What are you drinking?
All right, so it's a little early in the day for me, so this time I'm doing something a little bit easy. So this is Lighthearted Ale from Bell's. So you might have heard of the Two-Hearted Ale from them. I actually got a box of like a bunch of variations on their Hearted Ale series. The best one that I had in there was the Black-Hearted one, but I drank all those. So now I'm having the nice and easy Lighthearted, which is just like a pale ale version of the Two-Hearted.
Was the Black-Hearted like a black IPA, or what was?
Yeah, it's a black IPA. It was, hoppy, resiny, but also like had a nice roastiness, salty and kind of good balance.
And so you've got what's the ABV, and is there any fancy flavor text?
Oh, this is like 4. Yeah, this is 4. So it's for an American pale ale, that's like kind of average low. For an English, that's like a full on like IPA territory. So it's funny.
It's like no, I'd say it's sessionable. He says, quickly glancing at whatever he has. Cool. Why don't you crack that, and we'll move on to Curtis and see what he's got going on.
Okay, so I went old school, and I got something I haven't had in a long time, which is the Trappistes Rochefort.
Oh, my God, that's one of my favorite beers of all time.
So I'm the Trappistes Rochefort 8. Fantastic beer. I haven't had it in probably a decade.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's a little bit harder, especially where I'm at in Brooklyn. They don't stock up the Belgian ales as much. We've got a good selection of American ales.
Right.
But getting good Belgian ales is hard.
Did they not just get Bevmo out here? You can just pick up. Like, they just always have Rochefort. At least 6, if not 8.
6 is more common.
Oh, but 8's by far the best one. I think the 10's a little too sickly sweet, and the 8 is one of the more perfect beers I've had. When I did my master's in Amsterdam, the small corner shop at the end of my road always had it in stock, and it was under €5 for a bottle. Like, I think it was like $3.25. It was a luxurious time in my life. Excellent. While you crack and pour that,
Go.
I've got 2 local breweries, Wyvern True and Verdant, collabed. It's the Wyvern True Collaboration Series 22. It's a Farmhouse Spelt Pils. It's got the hops are the Hallertauer Tradition. It's 5.4%. ABV, its IBU is 17. It's got Barca Pilsner and Spelt as the malts, and the yeast are Escarpment Labs Crispy and Quebec and Brettanomyces Q.
That's a really interesting beer.
I hope so.
I mean, having Spelt as the malt is already like fairly interesting, but like like the with the Brett and all that. That sounds really nice.
Yeah, and also
it sounds like it's going to taste like a barn in the best way. I love beers like that. They just have this kind of like fresh kind of smell and taste.
Luckily, I'll taste this I'm glad we're not recording video because of the terrible technical difficulties, but this is one of the worst starts to a pour I've had in a while.
That is strong.
But while I tame this pour, Chad, what does your beer taste like?
Sorry, I'm taking it in. I mean, I would say it's definitely reminiscent of Bell's Two Hearted, but certainly like toned down. So like it's got that, I think, strong malt backbone to it, but it's not nearly as like thick and sweet. It's much more on the drier side, and the malt, I would say, is more of a supporting role than starring as much. And the hops are, I mean, they're a bit piney, and I would say kind of resiny, but still like balanced. It's not like obviously a super aggressive beer. It's only like 4%, so it's light and kind of what you expect, I would say, from like a hoppy pale ale. It's not like like a totally boring pale ale. It's not like the kind of thing that like I drink it and I forget that I am even holding it because it's so forgettable. It's a nice pale ale. So, but at the same time, I wouldn't put it at the top of like one of my favorite beers or anything like that. It's a nice sessionable pale ale. Yeah.
Nice, sounds great. We'll move on. Curtis, what's I mean, I think we've all had that, but I mean, if people in the audience haven't had the Rochefort, can you tell them what they're missing?
I'll try. I don't know if I really can do it justice. But here, I'll give it a taste here. Yeah, I mean, it's in my opinion, it's pretty transcendent. It's effervescent is a good way of putting it. I feel like there's definitely a strong kind of rock candy caramel flavor to it. It's definitely malt forward, not about hops at all. Got some medicinal qualities. Clove. Yeah, I would say that it's definitely sweet, but not as sweet as you said, as the 10. And in fact, yeah, I would say one of the reasons I like this one in comparison to some others in the same kind of sphere is that it's bubbly. It goes down very easily. It feels like a light beer, but it's 9.2% ABV. It's a very dangerous beer. Which to compare, I had also a very smooth beer, which was very surprising. I had a Bourbon County Stout from 2015 that I had aged. I bought it in around 2018 at the beginning of the game, and I promised myself I would open it up when we released. So
that's great.
We finally released. Yeah, but it was crazy because I remember having that beer when it was unaged, and it was very aggressive. It was very aggressive, boozy stout. But then aged, it was also just incredibly smooth, and it was evil because you would just it was like 14% ABV.
Oof.
Yeah.
I mean, it is my kind of beer, but also if it high ABV beers that hide themselves, I mean, they're great, but also dangerous.
Yeah, that's my jam. So I'm feeling those. I'm very happy right now.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, that's just one of the nice things about, I think, Belgian beers. You mentioned the clove and the mouthfeel, so like a bit usually more highly carbonated. And then also that helps, I think, the nose and also some of these other flavors come out, like the clove and stuff, but also just the Belgian yeast tends to have a little bit more of a, I'd say, wider spectrum of flavors, fruity and phenolic and all this stuff coming in. So they're always the best Belgians, I think, certainly are a kind of beer that stand alone as
yeah, I think it's great. And there's, I hate to say it, there's a lot of American takes on it, and I still think the Belgians are on top here, personally.
It's a different style.
take.
I wouldn't say they're on top. It's just a different, like, yeah. That's like saying that, a metal band is better than like a jazz band or something. They're just different things.
Yeah. Russian River is good.
I enjoy that comparison, metal and jazz, because actually, when you pay attention to both, you see the like connections that are not immediately sonically noticeable, and that is sort of the same way beer is. Like, some beers just taste so different, and you would be surprised they are of the same character. But just like music, there is a beer out there for everyone. Speaking of beer for everyone, this beer's for me right now. So this is the Farmhouse Spelt Pills. On the pour, I immediately smelt that like tanginess off of the Brett. It actually has a bit of almost lemony undertones, but really soft nose. I want to say, it doesn't make sense, but just ride this wave with me. I want to say, like, if you had left lemon cleaner and it went off somehow and it was 3 rooms away. That's the sort of what the nose is doing. Very light. Something's not quite there, but it definitely has this like almost clinical lemoniness, but again, all the way in the corner.
Then it's not in the corner and fermented.
Yeah, I resisted saying fermented cleaner because I think at that point the analogy, which is what I was going for, doesn't make any sense, and I lose all credibility. And I didn't start with very much. Interesting. So it's 5.4%, but it's got a really thin mouthfeel and the initial taste sort of comes and goes. It's got a nice long finish, but those first 2 parts make it feel much more like, 4% sessionable, like it just, and the whole taste isn't very boisterous. So this could, like, if you weren't careful, you could be like, oh yes, that tasted quick, I'll have another sip, and just accidentally 5.5% which, would be a shame because it does have this really nice long finish, and that's where the Brett's coming through. The immediate taste is definitely that Farmhouse, slightly tangy pills, but really light. And again, because the mouthfeel is kind of watery, it just makes you feel like I'm having a session ale. It's quite done. When there's almost this gap between the main taste and the finish, where that mouthfeel is the biggest part of the taste. You're like, oh yes, this is very watery. It's only after that fades that you're like, oh, there's this lovely tanginess that Brett's coming in. That like, oh, it's a bit off wonderfulness that Brett brings to beers, and that again, it's like 5 rungs down the like strength ladder, so it's quite light, but it's really long, and so because I'm rambling about the beer, I'm noticing just how long it is and how nice those Brett tones are. But if you sort of were just drinking this really quickly, you might not notice just how much of that taste curve is backloaded because it's like lower but longer, like a long tail. And actually, it's helping me notice those high citrus notes are still lingering as well. They're really interplaying nicely, just kind of like the nose was. This is really excellent. I'm curious, because it's got the Spelt and the Brett, I'm curious how well it would age in can. So I did buy 4 of them, so I might hold on a couple of them for a month or 2 and see how it goes, and then if that goes well, maybe at some point I know it's going to age poorly in the can, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, but I mean, with the Brett in there, I feel like it's actually probably going to do pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Like ideally you want the bottle with like some yeast in it, right? But,
yeah.
I think even in a can with Brett, you could probably have that thing sit around it. It'll actually like develop some.
Yeah, that's my suspicion as well. I know this is probably impossible for you guys to track down, but for the people in the UK, definitely track this down. Especially because the weather's finally turned and the sun's coming out. This is very much a late spring, early summer type beer, just because it's got that lightness but a little heft with the Brett. So it's not quite. Oh god, I just need something that has bubbles and some beer taste because I'm melting. It's like, yes, I'm still, the wind is a bit brisk. I still want to interplay. Yeah, really excellent.
Yeah, I'm gonna be a little bit of an old man now, but I'm just gonna like revel in the fact that you can get a beer like that in a can, and I imagine probably you got that relatively easily. I remember, 10, 15 years ago, getting a beer like that, like you couldn't just like walk down to the store and get a can of something like that. Like you'd have to. I remember the only place when we were living up in the Bay Area to get beer like that was Russian River, and for the most part, there was like one or two that you could get at select, really like particular craft beer stores. Otherwise, you'd have in a bottle. Otherwise, you'd have to go down to the brewery and just get it on tap, and that's the only place you'd see something like that. Whereas like now, like the proliferation of I think the diversity of styles of beer has been wonderful. The other thing is that like it's not like these kinds of beers didn't exist. They were just a lot more, I think, region locked, right?
Yeah.
So like, when I lived in England, one thing that I kind of saw while we were there was the, I think, influx of a lot of American influence on the craft beer culture there. And certainly that happened vice versa. I mean, obviously in America we stolen a lot from like Belgian beer, English and German beer, and all this stuff. But it's been really cool to see all the mixture across like regions and cultures.
Yeah, just to tag onto that, I think that's sort of been the big difference in the past 10, 15 years is like in Britain we never had like we didn't have microbreweries here. And I think that regional, hey, we've doing some weird stuff, but come to the tap room.
Yeah.
Maybe they have, if they've got a good relationship with a few bars, they might can or bottle the most regular beers they make.
Right.
But the whole point was you just come to the brewery and, and like in England, it was always just like, I mean, it would just be like the people who cask out for regions, but like they didn't really have tap rooms, most of them, right? It's just like, you come to this area, like here in the Southwest, or like a bit more Devon way, you can get a tribute, you can get a gem from Bath Ales, like you can get these standard ones. And when I first came to the UK in 2012, those were in all the bars. And then in the meantime, craft breweries came up, and those guys, and there it's about making things that are unique, but also in runs rather than in like sort of local small keg. We'll make this beer for our friends, kind of that vibe of a very, like you said, extremely local. And like it's crazy because some of the more interesting players have all made deals with supermarkets here in the UK, so that you can get like a Northern Monk or a Cloudwater, or even Vault City, who are this great sour. Vault City just does sours, and they're in Scotland, and they've just started making things for. Oh, I'm gonna get it wrong, so I'm just gonna say supermarket chain. And obviously, we had one of their guys on the podcast on episode. I won't look it up because my computer's temperamental, but and he was talking about how it was right before that deal sort of came out, right after that deal came out, and it was like, oh well, so now they're doing the like, this is definitely our craft thing, but because of economies of scale for the supermarkets, we can have this sort of our bestseller and have it at this certain price range in the supermarket, and we'll just take a loss locally in our store for the stuff we make on our own runs in that sort of same bracket of tastes. So just because we don't want people to feel like the devoted fans are getting screwed here. But it was a really interesting conversation about like, and it's that movement from like craft. Oh, but craft is like scalable. That's sort of the point. So when you are successful in the way that like microbreweries never were, because again, it's like this pocketed locale. If you're not bottling and canning, then I guess you could do 2 batches at the same time of a beer and hope more people walk in the door, but that's the scale attribute you've got. Yeah. Anyway, that's the ramble on microbrewing versus craft brewing. But we're here to talk.
I'm here for it.
Yeah, excellent. Literally and figuratively. But
I'm all about Femto-brewing.
Sorry?
said I'm all about Femto-brewing. So, you got micro-brewing, nano-brewing,
Pico-brewing.
No.
Yeah.
Those are too popular. Yeah, we're about Femto.
Nice. That's where you put the ingredients in your mouth and let it naturally ferment.
Exactly. You just kind of swish it around.
Oh, dear. But you guys are game devs who are not at the Femto level. And last time we spoke, you guys had I think you just in the teaser, was it, for Recursive Ruin? I think, right? God, I don't even remember how long ago that was.
It was the announcement video.
That's what it was, yeah.
Yeah.
And now the game's out.
Yeah. It's been a whirlwind. It's been intense. One of the most intense periods of my life, I would say, including doing the PhD.
I was gonna say, and you have done a PhD. That's intense. I mean, literally, like, so. I mean, is this not what you anticipated, just development wise, or was it like, was it just like last minute things, or like just the way timelines go, or was it just like we knew this was going to be intense and it was intense?
Yeah, kind of the last part. I mean, part of it is that it's not like you're correct, we're not quite Femto, but we're still pretty small, right? But we are a little bit of a level up. We have like a publishing deal, we have a contract, we have dates that we have to meet. There's actual money involved, and so it wasn't like in the past where if we could just make a thing, and then if it took longer, it took longer, and that was fine. It's like we really had to meet deadlines, and so and then of course we're also like always wanting to tweak things or add things or re-edit things, and so it was just trying, a long stretch of trying to make it the best it could be. Just working kind of at the top of our game, at the top of my possible level of output for a really long period of time.
Right.
I'm still kind of recovering, to be honest.
I'll bet, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, like I would say to contrast it with the PhD experience, I'll just speak to my own experience. For me, the thing that was most challenging about that was coming to the end. I had realized so many of the mistakes I had made throughout my PhD and setting myself up for the dissertation. I mean, some things I had done well, and my supervisor had guided me, kind of, helped me set myself up well as far as having lots of publications. But I think the thing that I was not so happy about is I feel like there wasn't as strong of a pool throughout the whole thing, that it made it a lot of work for me to really consolidate it into an expression that is singular.
Right.
And towards the end, the challenge for me was just more of a motivation issue and anxiety, like overcoming almost like a mountain of anxiety that I felt like the thing that I had arrived at was maybe not worth the effort or time I'd put in. And to contrast that with here, like when I would work on my thesis towards the end, there was a time when simply opening my editor was like took all my willpower to just simply look at it. Whereas like working on the game, it was never like that. Like I always felt very motivated to work on it, and it was something that we were really excited to close. It was just more of time.
Right.
It's just, we always wanted more time. We wanted more playtesting. We wanted more music. We wanted more sound design. We wanted more time to tune the puzzles. Just everything across the board, we could have done to make the game even better, but it needed to be done on a certain date to meet our kind of timeline. And also at a certain point, you kind of just have to move on and let it go and be the thing that it is.
That's right? The same thing with a dissertation, though. Like that, learning good enough versus perfection is the thing I still struggle with, and definitely the thing that helped me crank out, let's say 3.5 chapters in 2 months. Was I mean, it was like the ideas were there in my head, right? But I was in the wall of anxiety. But was the fact that for reasons we definitely don't have time nor inclination to go into, I had a very strict deadline of which was already extended because I lost my supervisor 45 days before I was supposed to hand in. This was my sixth supervisor. Yeah,
Wow.
just as a coloring of how that my time in a PhD went. Anyway, so but like then it was like, okay, you have until the end of February, and it was like, all right, I guess I just got to do it and not. I didn't have the time to worry about good enough versus perfection, and I feel like so I vibed with we have a publisher, and I was like, actually, that sounds like the best thing because one of the things where like one thing I learned well in my PhD was like scope creep is bad. I was constantly scoping downwards because I didn't have good advice in the beginning about what the scope should have been in the beginning, plus just finding more meat in the individual parts. And it sounds like you guys were describing not scope creep, but rather refinement creep. Like, oh, if I had more time, this bit, which is working and will do all the things I need, could be better. And like that's such a dangerous thing because without that deadline, you could just spin all those perfectly concerted, well-scoped moving parts until they were, platinum or diamond, but they wouldn't. That doesn't get the game in hands.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's exactly that. The game it's very human. I'm very proud of it, but there are definitely parts. If I had infinite time and infinite money, I would love to improve. But perfection is the enemy of shipping, of being done.
Yeah,
and we did it. We have a released game, which I'm pretty proud of.
Speaking of infinite, well, I was going to segue with the infinite to describing the game, but I didn't want to cut you off.
I was just going to touch on, I do think that in a creative endeavor, there's absolutely some truth to this sunken cost fallacy. And I feel like, it touches everything from something as big as ship the game to, there are times when I'm working on, whatever, some writing or music or sound design, and something's not working, and it's an easy trap to fall into, to just be like, I'm just going to keep iterating on this, and I'm just going to keep jamming until it works. And sometimes it's honestly just the best idea to just cut the thing, do something else, or at least go away from it for a long time and then come back later, as opposed to just spinning your wheels trying to make it better, because you can waste. Certainly, I, for myself at least, have wasted lots of time, like really making this whatever sound, exactly like I want it to be.
Just to add on to that, I would say personally, I think there are kind of two, at least with composition, but I think probably this applies to any kind of creative endeavor. But I've always thought of it as there are Beethovens and there are Mozarts. And the difference being that Mozart, music just came to him. He lived and breathed it. He could just fall down the stairs and compose a piece of music, right? Like, the dude it came out of him. But he didn't really ever sit down and just like meditate and struggle with it. Beethoven struggled with it. Like, he would go through many, many, many iterations of a piece and a melody, like 100 iterations of a melody before he finally got the thing he wanted. And I have to admit, I like Beethoven's music more personally, but there's a lot. Don't get me wrong, there's some really great Mozart music. I'm not fully dog on Mozart, but yeah, so there's just different kinds. There are people who it just comes,
Yeah.
And for me personally, never been that way about anything I've ever done creatively. It's always been a struggle, a fight,
That's interesting because I find that for me the struggle is sitting down, and like starting. But I'm very like I wrote half my dissertation in very little time, and I actually think the last chapters were the best written as well. Same thing with good lord, there's a cat at the door. Same thing with actually, like, I've started doing stand-up recently, and my best like I've been helping do tech for a night, a new comedian, new comic night for years now. But sitting down and be like, I will write, does nothing for me, except this is why I think I'm currently looking for an ADHD diagnosis, because I had a booked gig, I had 5 minutes to, and I had nothing, did nothing for the 2 weeks previous, and then a friend came to visit. She was supposed to go for dinner with someone, didn't, and so the morning of the gig, while she was in the shower, I just sat down, wrote a 7-minute set, and then when she went for dinner, I was like, okay, you're getting out of my space because I need 2 hours to like practice this. But I just moved things and added a couple of jokes, but it all kind of just blurted on the page. But the problem with that is, unless you're a Mozart, you have to wait for those moments to come. And like the Beethoven way gets a different style, but also I think that, boy, am I jealous of people who can just sit there and just work through things, like rain or shine, and just churn, because that's a skill or a trait that is like never really had. But I totally get what you mean, and I think the art will reflect those things, like the approach, right? I'm sure the same basic premises of like even jokes, right? Like if you just sort of blurt it on the page, more than likely it's going to be like kind of like more of a stream of consciousness storytelling type thing, versus if you were like, there are jokes here, and let me just refine it. I mean, sure, that's why I don't write one-liners and things, because a one-liner set is just iteration, right? Like there's no way around it. And you fill 5 minutes with 5-second minus set like bits. Like that sounds crazy. I wrote 5 minutes on the idea that graduation ceremonies are just one long queue to nowhere, because you just spent 4 years doing the thing and it's already finished. And it took me 7 minutes to say that, right? Like,
yeah.
Anyway,
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right, because Mozart's music is lighter, and I think it's also kind of more natural at the same time. There's a kind of naturalness to his music, and for instance, that's one reason why I think he actually has some good operas under his belt. Whereas Beethoven's, I don't know if you've heard Beethoven's opera, but don't
Not
listen
good.
to it. He didn't do that very well, even if he did do it 100 times. And I think it's because of that, the way that it came out, like you're saying.
That's Missa Solemnis, is that part of it? No, that's his mass, right? I guess that's
Fidelio.
what that was. Yeah. Fair enough. My classical is obviously lagging, but cool. So now let's segue to, if people didn't know, this game that you iterated on and that you wanted to iterate on more of. It's called Recursive Ruin. But rather me telling you guys and the listeners what it's like. I have played through the demo, and obviously we chatted a bunch before. But if you guys could just give, tell us about the game, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. I mean, the kind of one-liner explanation is that it's kind of if you took Gone Home, you stapled it onto some fractal version of Portal, and then it was directed by David Lynch. So there's definitely elements of it that are like, it's interesting. It's an interesting game, because I think to really enjoy it, you're gonna have to be somebody that's really likes hardcore technical, logical, left-brain things, and you're gonna also need to be somebody that really enjoys fractured, emotional, complex right-brain things. It kind of hits both ends of the spectrum very hard. If you're signed up for some kind of surreal story experiential stuff, and you're signed up for some recursion and fractals, and strange loops are really integral to the whole thing. So if you're like, yeah, it sounds awesome to me to like somehow do this self-collaborative cyclical puzzle solving thing, while simultaneously being the first person experience of David Lynch film or something, like I Want to Be Cooper and Twin Peaks. And this is the game for you, right? Put down your copy of Infinite Jest and play our game.
Also, just put down your copy.
Oh, come on. Come on.
Nah, I'm just it's such an easy joke to make that it had to be done.
Sure.
I have read it. It was a long time ago though, so I actually can't recall much of the book. But I think it was 2003, 4. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, it was like in between my Vonnegut and Murakami phases.
Sure.
Which is a great time to read it. I think.
I love Vonnegut. Yeah.
So when you say fractals, and so I mean, there's first of all, it's out on Steam. There's a demo which is free, which is I want to say 20-ish minutes long. The demo. Is that right? I didn't time
20
it,
to
but-
30. It
so
depends on how long. Sorry.
I was saying, yeah, it depends on the person. Like certain people take longer or shorter based on the puzzles, but generally about 20-25 minutes.
Yeah. Also, whether you so I mean, you start in a room, and it's clearly some future time. There and you like it's really simple. It's just left click interact, and you get voice notes on various things, which does nice world building. There's a weird holographic person hunched in a chair, which was not explained in the demo, which I was like, I wonder what this thing is. But also, I have to ask, there's a mirror. It shows the room to the point where when you first enter, you're like, oh, this is a huge space because the feng shui of that room is putting the mirror in the right place because it just opens the place up and like, oh, that's just a really big mirror. And then you're just like some wispy fog. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I had this because I've talked to you guys about this game, and I had this cognitive dissonance of, is this because games don't normally give reflections? Oh, but I have something. And now I don't know if this is like, oh yeah, we're just video game with a mirror, or you guys have put something in your David Lynchian stuff such that me starting the game, I'm already not in the good sort of place physically, which I really enjoyed because again, if there was no reflection, that's just video game, but there is a reflection, and it just piqued my curiosity, and I really liked that was like within the first 30 seconds of me playing.
Yeah, you gotta watch H Bomber Guy's history of mirrors in video games. It's like a 3-hour history of the technology of mirrors in video games.
It should really be the hacks of mirrors in video games.
But yeah, I mean, so it's interesting. Mirrors are really heavy duty. They're not a simple thing to take on.
Oh yeah.
So we decided we wanted the mirror, and we decided to do it kind of the right way. So if you compare it, I mean, and also like a lot of things with games, there's like kind of give and take, and there are compromises to be found everywhere.
Yeah.
Right. So we just happened to have that space was amenable to being rendered in a mirror. That was like a thing that was possible.
Oh, okay.
So we wanted a mirror. It was possible. As far as why you're the protagonist is as they are, I'll simply state that you could think of a mirror as a form of a strange loop or recursion. And if you read Gödel, Escher, and Bach, he's got some things to say about that. But it's a kind of teaser. I would just say I would highly encourage you to play the rest of the game, and it will be further illuminated.
I like the light pun with mirror talk.
Yeah, I'll just to kind of slightly out on that, I'll just say it was a particular decision with intention behind it. Yeah,
I had a feeling, but also I think that's you're talking around it. I think helps for those who aren't familiar with the game. Loops are obviously the key here because once you, my one complaint I will say is that I found the game case and couldn't interact with it. And then I came back, and then I was cued by the game, and then the disc was just beside the case. And I'm giving you a hard time, but I was just like, because like
you want to see that case open up, right?
Yeah, kind of, or just be the like my click opening it and making it pop out versus being told the disc is there and it sort of popping out and then it being there before I could like check the case.
Yeah,
I believe the in-lore fiction here is that Behemoth got into it before you could.
That's fair. But like I said, like I think it was because I was so in the world, because it is a really, really good intro, and then it was like, oh, that's just out now. But also, I don't know if that means something in the deeper lore of the game, because all you're doing is building up mystique at this point. So I know that, but you put the game into the television, and then you get transported to a new world. And that's when the crazy starts, so to speak.
Well, you skip the fun part, which is you on the TV comes the game Recursive Ruin. So playing Recursive Ruin, you play a game called Recursive Ruin.
Yeah, sorry, I did forget to say that the game I also didn't mention the talking cat.
By far the most popular character.
I mean, it's a cat named Behemoth. Of course it is.
Yeah.
I also like that like you have to interact with this cat a bunch. Like there's no sequence breaking around cat. It's like, nope. Your talking cat is integral to you starting this game within a game.
Yes, it is required.
Yeah.
It is required you interact with cats to play this game.
I mean, this
and just in general in life. Yeah. It's one of the more realistic elements in the game that you have to interact with a cat in order to make any progress whatsoever.
So basically in the demo, I don't want to like go like play by play, but basically you meet some interesting characters which describe the world and the state of the universe, which is setting up the intrigue and motif, and then you're solving puzzles that are at this point primarily about getting to a thing that creates a crate, and then throwing that crate into a sphere with an eyeball on it.
Yep.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I accept that.
Yeah. And,
sounds accurate.
And at no point in the demo did these particular objects, then their significance become clear. The world is very... I don't even know how to describe it. The aesthetic is, otherworldly in the sense of you have like very clean lines and segmented things, and really light on the textures. It's very much like, think like metals and plastics, sort of just shiny bits and bobs, creating a world, or at least a part of a world, and then as you look around, you realize that part is... hence the fractals is repeated ad infinitum in all directions. And in the brief time with the demo, you really figure out that like this isn't window dressing, and like part of the core puzzle mechanics is figuring out how to make use of that repetition. And then I guess I'll just top off the description with, at this point after the demo, you have left click is your interact, and then right click is move the games that change the world in one significant way, which is at least tends to be raising a platform, which is just a chunk of the world, which will raise all the repeated. That's the word. Repeated chunks. And then you get introduced to a shrink mechanic, which makes you smalls.
Yeah, exactly. We call that shifting the world.
Yeah.
So like the way that it kind of works is that the world itself has a kind of transformation matrix that describes the repetition that occurs. And what the shifting the world does is this is like getting real techy, but that changes the transformation matrix. And so it changes the manner in which the world repeats in and out of itself. And so the interest, of course, is that the way that the world relates to itself geometrically is changed. There are elements, cyclically, where you can get to, or it'll deny you passageway. It'll allow you to, kind of do self-collaboratively place things for yourself to find, things of that nature. That's the very left brain aspect of it.
That's very much the it felt like this isn't mathematically correct, but it felt like inverse Portal to me. Where in Portal you are in a static place and you are moving around in novel ways, and this feels like you're sort of you think of yourself, at least in the puzzles I played, it was very much if I'm this point, how do I move the world around and then shift myself a bit, but it very much felt like the other way around, where the world is the thing that you are trying to work around. Obviously with the shrinking mechanics, there is an element of it's both, but I very much felt like thinking of the puzzles that way as inverse Portal really helped me. Oh, okay, or right. So, what state does the world have to be for me to do this relatively simple thing, like walk forward, pick up a box, because now the box is in the right spot.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of it is kind of thinking through. It's okay. Let me describe it like this: the world itself, obviously, works in a manner that is not like the real world. So a lot of what the game is trying to model that in your head, because it's not straightforward, it's not intuitive necessarily. But you'll find that you can get your brain to work like that. And you'll start to model these relationships in your head to where you can kind of recursively get to where you need to go and change the space such that you can get passage to where you go. So oftentimes the puzzle solutions, you'll realize, are very straightforward and simple once you get to the understanding that's required. So a lot of the game is just trying to get towards that understanding.
I think this is why I enjoyed it so much, because the way you described it is like, oh yes, I'm a logician, of course. Of course I would enjoy a game like this. But I think that is kind of like you said, how the few puzzles I solved in the demo really came about was just having a, I think maybe that's why I'm thinking of it as inverse Portal, because it's modeling what the world is doing, as you said, right? So it's okay, versus thinking of a route, which is a very first person perspective. It's so what is the chunky change, which as a person who just sees modal logic, for instance, and possible world semantics, that's my jam, because that's just apparently how I think. And it's now I'm really curious. I'm gonna have to try and find other people who have played this game, because I'm really fascinated at games like this. There was that one we talked about before you were on that had just came out recently that was an infinite puzzler, very
Marquette? Marquette?
Yeah, I think that was it. And it was super interesting talking to people who played that to see which types of puzzles they tripped up on, and be like, oh boy, humans just think real different, don't they?
Honestly, I have to say, this was one of the most challenging aspects of making the game, is balancing puzzles. Especially our game is pretty linear, because it's trying to do this kind of narrative thing. So it ends up being more linear. And people just think differently. There are just some people where certain kinds of puzzles are just inherently more challenging for them. Whereas other people, they get to the next puzzle and all of a sudden it flips, and they get it, and then somebody else, they just really trip up on it. And then there are some people who are just just geometrically their brain just really clicks, and they're just kind of naturally very good at it. And there are other people where just they enjoy it, but it's definitely more challenging overall. That was very hard to balance.
And to add to that, I think part of the challenge for us in making it in that it is so linear is I think that there's been a lot of big puzzle games that have come out since Portal, and I think one of the innovations that has turned out, I think, to be a good idea is to have maybe more of a collection or a cluster or a cloud of puzzles wherein you don't necessarily have to solve every single one in order to make progress in the game. Whereas in a game like ours, every single puzzle in the game is an off-ramp for somebody, right? There's probably every single puzzle in the game, someone stopped playing the game because they could solve that puzzle.
Right.
Which is a difficult thing to grapple with. It means that you have to really think about how difficult you want something to be, and it's kind of this probabilistic filter where you're trying to make it interesting, and that'll make it, for the people that do solve it, feel more satisfied. Maybe it's a little bit peakier, but then, you have to think about what the fall off is.
Right.
And if you're too tight on that, you can just alienate a ton of people. And for us, one of the very important things for us with the game is that we wanted people to get through it for the story.
I was about to say, being narratively focused must make that extra challenging.
Exactly. So, if we were going down the route of just making the most hardcore puzzle game ever, and the narrative wasn't as important, or is something that you just experience more ambiently, then, I think we could have balanced it to be a much more challenging thing with a lot more puzzles in it. But it was more of a balanced game. So a lot of development time was spent trying to figure out, like, is this too hard, or is it too binary? Is the hint sufficient? Are people going to be annoyed by the hint? Can they figure it out even if they decide to read the hint? And then trying to make sure that the game is still enjoyable for the people that can solve it, right? Because you can tune it to where everybody solves it, but then it's not interesting at all.
Yeah.
So this was, I think, probably the hardest part to nail and balance for the game.
So this was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you guys, which was around the hints, right? So when I played through the demo, I did the like standard, hey, I'm not just a player, I'm trying to talk to the devs, I'm review or whatever. So it's like, oh, okay, I'm gonna look around a lot more, but I'm gonna see these hints, and the hints were. I also have a habit of breaking games because I always choose not the path the people think. So like I got a couple hints, not in the order I think the average person might have got them, just because it was like, oh, that doesn't make sense. And the next hint came in, like, oh, okay, so it is what I thought it was, because I wasn't. But like, then it occurred to me, it's like, oh, this is pretty well spelling out how to solve this puzzle. And well, obviously, because I just played the demo, I was curious, like, I just, are the hints like, was that specifically to show off, here's the demo, everyone will finish it, these hints are straightforward? And you seem to indicate like there are hints throughout the game. I'm gonna guess that they become a little more esoteric, but I'm just going off what you said. Just speaking to like what that hint system is in the whole game, and then how you approach that with the problems like that tension you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so at the beginning, I would say they're more tutorial than hint. And Chad and I had even discussed the possibility of making it a separate system. The problem is you run into this issue with every new mechanic or concept you introduce to a player has a cost to it. So you have to do this cost-benefit ratio of, is it worth it to have a separate hint versus tutorial system that look different, that might even need to be interacted with differently? Is that doing enough to justify its additional complexity? We landed on, we'll keep it, because it's only going to be once, we'll keep it more tutorial-esque in the beginning, and then after that, we're going to try to make it more hint-like. And in fact, in the next kind of puzzle level that you get into, it explicitly tells you, do not read these unless you want hints, because these are now like hints, right? So it actually tells you it does a switch. You could justify maybe doing it the other way, but this is what we landed on.
I mean, I think that's
so
really...
they become a little bit more hint, a little less tutorial in the later.
Yeah, but to kind of your question though, I think it's not so much that the hints become more esoteric or don't try to help as much. I think it's more just that the complexity of the puzzles increases, and there's a fundamental difficulty in uh, communicating relationships in a fractal space through text that is incredibly limiting, right? So there are times when you want to talk about something and you can't just use words like up and down or forward and back because it's they're all of these at the same time.
This is another very challenging thing about making this game. So I would say another challenge was just having the player understand where to go. Because it's not like a normal level. Like in a normal game, you would just kind of like generally put these like signposts that say like that way. You know, this game doesn't work like that. Like things are cyclical. That way ends up being behind you, in a sense. So like, how do you
just have a marker and then a compass that points to the marker? What's the problem?
just yeah. So like another big challenge was trying to make it clear where players should go, especially in the beginning where they're unfamiliar with mechanics. So we tried to make it clear, and it's still challenging. There is for some people that the beginning can be a little bit of a big difficulty spike. Just encountering the cyclical world for the first time is a little challenging for some people. So yeah, just getting the player oriented and knowing generally where to go and what to do in a cyclical repeating world turns out hard.
Yeah, just to kind of riff on that a little bit more, like even beyond the hint system, just doing simple things as like at one point we had R&D'd a little bit the possibility of having a more explicit, almost quest-like system during the puzzles to show you, okay, here's your goal right now, here's the thing that you're trying to do, and highlight that thing. But the problem ended up being, because it is infinitely nesting, that thing that you need to do ends up like repeating in all these different ways. And you either have like this just blast of highlighting across the game world, which is telling you to go kind of everywhere, or you can try to make decisions like, well, maybe we only highlight the thing that's in the same depth as you, which works sometimes. But the problem is there's a lot of times where the solution, you have to be interacting with something 1 or even 2 depths away from you in order to...
Yeah, I was going to say, the whole point of making it a puzzle game is that the puzzles won't be straightforward, so that undoes any sort of easy
these things became... so things like highlighting, things like a compass, an arrow, all of these just didn't work for this game. And I think really what ended up happening is we realized, at least for the way we were making the game and the game that we made, there was not really one solution. And so really there's kind of a family of puzzles in every level that lean pretty heavily on a particular mechanic per level, and kind of really the solutions are particular for each one of those levels to try to make those the most clear as they can be.
Interesting. So when you were mentioning like different approaches to puzzle games, it occurred to me that I don't think I've ever seen sort of like a Metroidvania puzzle game where the Metroidvania, like the skills are just epistemic. So you could theoretically pass a whole game if you just could think the right way, but actually the standard path through the game would get you into new solutions, which would show you coming back. And that just really tickled me. But that's kind of what aligned with what you were saying, which is just like you need to marry these things together, otherwise you never get to that other part. And if it was this epistemic Metroidvania type thing, that would be like some bonus extra thing. But obviously, to get through a narrative, you don't want people never noticing something in a corner over there.
Yeah, exactly. So I actually think that's a perfect description of The Witness, for instance. Yeah, so I would say that is an epistemic Metroidvania, like through and through. But the difference is that The Witness, I think, was happy to let you play with having no understanding of the narrative whatsoever.
Yeah.
Whereas
and you kind of didn't need to, like you could just play the game.
Whereas I think our game, is heavily invested in the story. You really, to appreciate the game, you really, really do need to engage with it. And so you have to engage with it kind of linearly. And so that definitely shaped the way that the levels came about and functioned itself. It's all very braided together.
Yeah. The irony of needing to think about your game linearly is not lost on me.
Yes. I mean, it's like the cyclical linear thing. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I was going to say is there's actually kind of a genre around this premise. I don't think it's as cleanly executed in every instance of it, but have you ever heard the term Metroidvania before?
Oh, I haven't. No. It immediately makes sense.
Yeah, it's this kind of idea that, like, okay, you have, this open explorable space, there's things that are gated off, but it's not necessarily like an RPG mechanic or a weapon or, power up that gives you access to them, but rather knowledge of how to interact with them. That really is the thing that lets you get further and will encourage you to backtrack and interact with things that you've seen previously. So I think it's a really interesting, one of the games that I saw kind of included again in this cluster, and I don't know that I would say it's the cleanest execution, but Return of the Obra Dinn is something where they give it as an example, and I do think it has some of it. It's not you can't go anywhere in that game from the very beginning, but there's a lot of things that you can get further in by backtracking and knowing certain events.
Yeah, but
there's also a certain amount of unlocking that happens.
Yeah, I will say that one big decision we made with this game about towards the early part of it that shaped it fundamentally was, like, how do you place things in this world? How does it progress? And one idea was that you could have had it, and we did do some prototyping to this, where each puzzle was its own separate world that repeated. And, kind of like Portal-esque. And so in Portal, you have like a puzzle, you go to the next room, you have a separate puzzle, you go to the next room, you have a separate puzzle. Our worlds don't really, so we tried kind of something like that at first, and the repeating nature of the world just made it not work at all. It was fundamentally kind of broken, because what we realized was that learning how a repeating world relates to itself is a kind of learning curve in and of itself, right? So there's a process a player goes through just getting plopped down in this place to just understand how they are placed in it, and how the nature of the space and how it relates to itself. And so it ended up making a lot more sense, and what we arrived at was the idea of having larger levels. So before they were much smaller.
Oh, right, because you were trying to...
Much larger levels with several puzzles, sets of puzzles, families of puzzles, with a unified mechanic, kind of be the main way that these levels ended up working. We also couldn't do, just to give another thing we couldn't do, we had thought about doing an open world thing.
Oh, God.
Also doesn't work.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine how that would...
You'd have to go 4-dimensional, I think.
Oof.
So that might have been too much.
Yeah.
So this is what we arrived at, and I think it works pretty well generally. You get to see some variety. Oh yeah, sure.
Sorry, I was trying to be coy and interrupt you, and then I interrupted you with pointing at the can. So we have this new format where we do 2 episodes a week instead of what we our epic long ones. So I'm just gonna tag us out. Like, I have to do so much editing, so I'm just gonna be like, it's fine, I'll just ramble a bit. But you guys can just keep your recordings going, and then I'll chop them up at the right point. So now that I've hijacked, if you could finish your thought, Curtis, and then we'll go and say our last things about the beers, and then we can ramp back into the things, and then start chatting as well.
Yeah, so just my final thought is like, I actually think we arrived at, I think probably, it's a solution at least I like a lot, if not the best solution, of having each space be unique. It relates to itself fractally in a unique way, uses a unique mechanic, and we get to have a unique aesthetic for each level. And I think it ends up lending a lot of variety to the game. I haven't read much reviews of like, oh, it just repeats the same thing over again. A lot of people say like there's a lot of variety. I mean, it does, right? But it's not the same mechanics.
It's like, oh, so no one understood how the game worked if they didn't
Nobody
say that.
understood. It is all different spaces.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
To that point, yeah. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think for this game, for the story that we wanted to tell, the thing that we wanted to say with this game, we landed on the right solution for it. But I will say that if we were ever to make a puzzle game again, which I'm not sure that we would actually, because I feel like making it has so many perils. But one of the things I'd probably be putting a lot of thought into is this kind of more open world that isn't so requiring the player to solve and engage with every single puzzle.
Right.
I do think that there is a real cost for that, and it's a cost for everyone, because it means that there are going to be people that like the game just feels super difficult, and then people that feel like the game is too easy. Whereas like if you can spread it out and you can make some of the content optional, you can kind of make everyone more likely to be happy with what they got out of it. Yeah.
Well, and similarly, like if narratives are locked away, or like, because some people skip all the cutscenes, and so again, if you have a more fluid approach to things, then they can kind of stream from puzzle to puzzle and be happy. So yeah, I get why that would be like.
As a counter argument, I'll just throw this gauntlet down real quick before we get beers. But I will say, I think that in games there is this tendency to try to make everybody happy, and try to make a game all things for all people. And I do think that there is something to be said about a game having an identity, taking a stance, being like, this is what this game is. It's not going to be for everybody, right? But the people who really vibe with it will get something greater out of it than just kind of a oatmeal of like generally consumable mush.
I mean, I agree with that. I think it's all about balance and what you want for the particular game. Like, so for us in this game, the puzzles are important, but not the only important thing.
Right.
A different game with different concerns might balance things differently and may steer more people towards different parts of it differently.
Yeah. And I think that next episode, we're going to chat a little more about the aesthetics and the narrative. And obviously that'll tie us back to the game mechanics. But for now, Chad, last thoughts on your beer?
Yeah, one of the I'm through it now, which is not surprising since it's pretty sessionable. The thing that I think I'm left with it is that as far as session beer goes, I thought it was great. I really enjoyed that it has a kind of lingering bitterness to it. That there's a lot of other sessionable beers I could drink that I think, I drink it, and as I said, I kind of forgot I drank it by the time I'm done with it. But this one, I feel like I actually got something out of it that was a little bit longer lasting, and it has this kind of foresty, piney kind of kind of lasting bitterness to it that I enjoyed.
Excellent. Curtis?
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, for me, this beer is kind of nostalgic. There are certain just flavors and songs and things that are iconic and nostalgic and just bring you back to a certain place. So this is just really bringing me back to my time in England and in Europe, touring with bands and stuff. And so, yeah, I love the flavors. I love the taste. Effervescent. It's sweet, but not cloying. It's complex, but smooth. So, yeah, it's great. I'm vibing it.
I mean, being in Europe, I think if I can find a shop that has it in stock and is open, thanks to this Jubilee weekend, I am going to have to track myself down a bottle, because I think it's been almost 2 years. No, I don't think I've had a Rochefort 8 since the before times. Which is anywhere between 2 months in the way I feel and 17 years also in the way I feel, but practically more like 2.5 years. For me, the the Wiper and True Verdant Farmhouse Spelt Pills didn't change, and I think that's a good thing. It still had that nice long finish. The Brett tang didn't. So one thing I was wondering about, because it had that sort of longer finish, is whether my palate would acclimatize, and I think it might have shortened a bit, but really it still lingers. I still taste it, and actually, if anything, when I got used to the Brett, the lemon, so that light citrus on the finish just got a little more apparent as the beer went on, and I think that made it a much more rounded finish, and that's why I slowly drank it, because again, that finish was so nice that I didn't really feel like I needed to replace it with anything. But yeah, that's that'll do us for this episode. If people wanted to see what you guys do and slash buy your game, where would they find you guys, and what would they do?
Well, you can follow us.
It's my fault. I should ask
Twitter.
one of you. This is bad hosting.
I was gonna say you can follow us on Twitter at BitRockGames if you just want to follow the studio. Individually, we have our own Twitters at Dr. Chad McKinney and at Dr. Kurt McKinney. Additionally, if you want to find out more about the game, you can just go to recursiveruin.com, and there's a little blurb there, as well as a link to just take you directly to the Steam page if you want to check out the game. I would certainly encourage people to play the demo. It is a particular configuration of ideas, and I think that there's, as we said, a strong emphasis on the narrative and the puzzling elements. Some people may resonate with only one of those, and so you maybe just give it a shot and see if it's your kind of thing. But yeah, you can check it out there.
Anything else to add?
Yeah, I hope you like the game.
Excellent. Well, you can find us at Tanked Up Cast on Twitter. I'm at the Omniarch. You can find all the things we do here at outoflives.net, at outoflives.net, or Out of Lives Network on the Twitter or the Twitches and the YouTubes, although the Twitches are not happy with me these days. And YouTube, we'll see what you guys will see, given that we aren't recording the video because my computer's angry at me. But yeah, that's it for this episode. So thanks again, guys, and we'll catch you both next episode, which will be 3 days from when you're listening to this, listeners, dear. All right, take care.
Cool. Take care.
Oh, and Chad's just not going to say goodbye.
Damn, Chad.
Goodbye.
www.outoflives.net.
My head is dying down. I know.
I've known that for years, Chad. People are missing this comedy gold.